thank you all for joining. This promises to be very interesting talk. Really looking forward to it. I have perused the EBRAINS infrastructures a little bit, but not as much as I would like. And I think understanding what is going on in this area would be is absolutely key. So as a quick matter of introduction, I just want to say a huge thank you, Jan, for joining us today. I know that you are extremely busy, and that's very well acknowledged. I also would like to say how important Jan has been in the development of the neuroinformatics, I would say, worldwide, through his implications. So you have seen his bio, but just want to remind people he's been the chair of the INCF. He's also the chair of the IBI initiative at the moment. He's been involved. He's also the editor-in-chief of Neuroinformatics, Frontiers in Neuroinformatics, and his involvement in the HBP and EBRAINS is just outstanding. And you're leading the EBRAINS project, which is a huge project in Europe. So thank you so much again. I think we're really looking forward to it, and I'm personally looking forward to seeing what kind of connections and standards could we share and use across those projects and our own NeuroHub, like a CONP project in Montreal, but also elsewhere in the world, of course. So Jan, if you want to take it over, thanks very much again, truly.
Thank you very much, JB. Is the sound working okay?
Yeah.
That's good. It's great to be here in this virtual meeting room, and I appreciate your introductory comments. I'm aware of the large interests in this group in research infrastructures, and let's see what we can discuss on this occasion. A little bit slow on this occasion, but hopefully we'll get there in a second. There we go. Okay, so I will take the perspective of the EBRAINS research infrastructure and take a look at how we interact internationally, particularly considering two international bodies, organizations. And then, of course, when I give my comments, it's from one point of view, but I'm trying to do it in such a way that it should be maybe relevant for any other research infrastructure in the same way. So I'm going to talk about the Human Brain Project, EBRAINS, INCF, and IBI, and how we interact. So let's just define the Human Brain Project in case some of you may not have the full overview. It's one of 3 European Commission Future and Emerging Technology flagship projects. It's been running for 7-8 years now. We'll be finishing in 2023. And it has been one of the largest research projects in the world. By no means the largest research program. US Brain Initiative, for example, is much, much larger. But as a single project, it is very large. Involving, for example, over time, not all at the same time, but altogether more than 140 universities or research hospitals and centers across Europe. And in the Human Brain Project, we have teams of researchers and technologists, developers that work together to scale up the idea of exploring the brain from many different perspectives for several different specific purposes, and also to develop the technologies or the infrastructures necessary to work with neuroscience in a new way. So in the final phase, which we are in now, the focus at the scientific level is advancing the science of brain networks, their role in consciousness and artificial neural nets, and expanding what we call the EBRAINS research infrastructure. So let's define that. That is a so-called distributed digital infrastructure for brain and brain-inspired research. It was launched in the fall of 2019 by HBP, and it is currently maintained and further developed by HPP until the end of our project in 2023. And EBRAINS currently provides tools and services assisting scientists in their research at different levels in the collecting of research data, analysis, sharing, integration of these data, and for the purpose particularly of modeling and simulation of brain function. But EBRAINS, while it comes from the Human Brain Project, it's not only targeting the Human Brain Project. It is developed to be for the broader community. Everything that you can find on the EBRAINS research infrastructure is actually available for a broader community. It is also sustainable because 7 institutions across Europe have joined forces to create a new legal entity based in Brussels, Belgium. This new legal entity is called, it's a so-called non-profit, it's called the EBRAINS SBL. And this organization is the coordinator now, since this year, of the Human Brain Project, and will be leading the future EBRAINS operations in Europe after 2023. We had a good development this year, this month, by being approved or being a part of the roadmap of the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructure, which is an important achievement because it gives us easier access to the different kind of funding bodies that will help us maintain operations. In the S3 process, we were also supported by then 10 countries in Europe, and the exact number is probably 128 institutions. So EBRAINS is built by the Human Brain Project, and its connection to HPP science is tremendously important. An S3 research infrastructure builds on strong science and scientific excellence. So this connection is absolutely critical. And the HPP science is going on until 2023. A lot of other scientific projects will take over, and EBRAINS will stay connected with these projects. Now a little jump to an organization that many of you know particularly well, and there is a reason for bringing up INCF on this occasion. It is extremely relevant for a research infrastructure to have a standards organization for open and fair neuroscience, which is now what the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility is providing. It also creates this unique environment of working groups that allows a number of people to come together for various types of interactions and co-developments. And from these working groups, standards can emerge, and also a number of training events can emerge that are very valuable. And you will hear later how we interact with the INCF in this regard. And of course, in Canada at McGill, you actually have the INCF Canadian Node. Then we have the IBI, the International Brain Initiative, which is something different, but it's also relevant in the context of this international outreach and collaboration. So the International Brain Initiative were formed by 7 large brain initiatives around the world, the Human Brain Project being one of them, and the other ones are listed here: Australian Brain Initiative, the Japan Brain Minds, Canadian Brain Research Strategy, the US Brain Initiative, Korea Brain Initiative, and also the China Brain Initiative. And in Canberra in 2017, a particular declaration was signed by these initiatives to work together, and stating simply that no single initiative will be able to tackle the challenge to measure, map, image, model, simulate, understand, imitate, diagnose, and heal the brain. So there is a reason to work together. The Canadian Brain Research Strategy has a clear mission, and you can find it online. It is active now, building, as it says in its mission statement, to build on Canada's strengths and current investments in cutting-edge collaborative neuroscience to transform neurological and mental health for Canadians. Vision of innovation and collaborative brain research that will drive policy as well as social health and economic advancement for Canada and the world. So that's how your initiative expresses its mission, and there are similar missions, of course, in the other ones. So in this talk, I will talk about the EBRAINS research infrastructure. What is it? What does it consist of? The services in this infrastructure, and dive into one of the services, what we refer to as the data and knowledge service. Then I will comment on how these services are using the INCF resources and its network, and how it is interacting with all the BRAIN initiatives and stakeholders through the IBI, primarily through very concrete examples. I will follow that up by commenting on open science and how that is relevant for research infrastructures. And finally, the opportunities created by the new open science movement, the INCF and the IBI in combination. So let's first take a look at the EBRAINS research infrastructure. So the multiple layers of this infrastructure. At the core, we have a base infrastructure, which is made up of high-performance computing centers and also neuromorphic computing facilities. So then we deploy tools and services on top of this base infrastructure, and we store data. This is all of it accessible from a community. There is data and metadata coming in, and we will explain to you in a moment how we can ingest data and metadata, make this data findable, make it possible to analyze these data, send it to various types of workflows, and extract features which are relevant for model building and simulation. So between the infrastructure and the community, very important, we have support, what we refer to as a high-level support, which is quite a large investment by the Human Brain Project at this point in time. And this support function supports all users of the EBRAINS research infrastructure. For example, related to the sharing and publishing of data and models through the data and knowledge services, but also for all the tools and workflows that are currently available in our EBRAINS, through our EBRAINS web portal. We have had a voucher program that has connected us to a number of projects around the world. Of course, most of them in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. More than 40 projects have, through these vouchers, delivered their requests for particular features to be implemented in the infrastructure. And then I worked with our teams to make it possible. And we've had a number of partners coming into the project through open calls following the first initial contract. So what are these EBRAINS services? Well, before looking at them, the access is important. Who can use these services? Well, most of the services, or many of them, are open. That includes what we have on data and knowledge services. It's also including the support. Anyone can request support for what they have found. We also have access control services, but you can get the necessary EBRAINS account very easily if you use your institutional email. If you send from a Gmail, it might be a bit more tricky. There are more steps to verify you then. And that means that researchers at universities and research institutions around the world are prioritized for accounts. There are some services that are only for selected users. That are the services which requires quite deep support and access to the most advanced computing. So that requires application procedures. The services are listed on the left side, and they actually, in addition to those on the left side, we have kind of a fundament, which is the collaboratory, EBRAINS collaboratory, available at wiki.ebrains.eu. So a number of these services are at least connected to this collaboratory as a working environment for the researchers. You need an EBRAINS account to have it, and then you can start working in this collaboratory. That provides, of course, the necessary access control, and also allows you to establish groups and units so that you can work together in closed environments inside the collaboratory. It has a wiki of services that gives the access to various types of services that you can connect to your workspace. It has a drive, storage space. It has a lab, which is the Jupyter lab, which is absolutely critical for Jupyter notebooks, which is used now very frequently. It also has Office documents, Word, PowerPoint, and these kind of things. And then so-called buckets, which is the term we use for the larger storage spaces that's also available in private areas of this collaboratory. This is critical, of course, in order to be able to, for example, bring in data that you have found in eBRAINS, connect it with your own data, and then go to the various tools you can find and set up your pipelines. So all of this is built on top of high-performance computing services, scalable and interactive. And these services are based in 5 locations in Europe in what we call provided by what we call the Phoenix Consortium. So let's take a look at this. You will find it at ebrains.eu, and if you want to focus on the services, you can use the upper right hamburger menu, for example, or just click on services and go through what we have at this point in time. This will, of course, mature, grow as we move forwards. Very briefly now on these 5 main categories to the left, and then we'll return to the data knowledge in a moment. So data knowledge that's online solutions to facilitate sharing and access to research data, computational models, and software. It has 2 pieces, one for sharing the data models or software, and the other for finding them. And the sharing one is built on a curation process. So there is a control procedure for everything that goes into the system, which I will explain in a moment. The Find Data service is entirely open, and there's both a graphical user interface and also programmatic access. The atlases are fundamental, of course, in the brain area, just like geographers will need maps and representations of the Earth. We need the same for the brain, but in our case, in 3 dimensions, of course. So we have a focus on the human brain with multi-level human brain atlas functionalities and several atlases including. We have a rat brain atlas, which has been developed in the HBP, so-called axon space atlas. We are using the Allen mouse brain atlas, which is a openly shared atlas, and embed that into our services, which includes tools to integrate data in atlas space. So you come with your data and you will get help from these tools to actually locate and register your data to the different spaces, and also to analyze the data in atlas space. So this atlas effort is led from Jülich. Many of you probably know the famous atlases produced by Jülich, and some, of course, also in collaboration with exactly McGill. Then we have the simulation category, which at the moment is made up of simulation tools for cellular level, network level, whole brain, and also a suite of analysis and visualization tools. This will be reworked quite soon, and there will be additions also to include molecular level, and the presentation of the different tools will also be changed a bit, more coming together. It's a very extensive offering in the simulation area. Then we have the brain-inspired technologies, which are made up of 2 main elements. One is neurorobotics, which is actually an extension of simulation, but it is simulation based on embodiment, having a virtual body in a virtual environment, and testing your models in such a context gives another dimension to simulation. This is all virtual, this is all online, and you can try it out in relation to your simulation work. Then the neuromorphic computing offers both simulation and emulation, in fact, on 2 different platforms, Spinnaker based in Manchester and BrainScales based in Heidelberg. These are quite different in a way, but they both belong in the neuromorphic category. And they're unique systems. We then have the medical data analytics, which has 2 main parts. At the moment, 1 part is available. Now, because of the nature of the data, this is not open to anyone else than those who are at more than 30 hospitals that are currently included in the Medical Informatics Platform network, meaning that they have installations at their hospitals, meaning that they can access the data at their own hospitals, and through federation mechanisms, they can not see or access, but analyze data also in other hospitals. It is possible to see how this works on synthetic data and through a public channel. Then there will be an addition of a new and very exciting service on intracranial EEG data. This is a fascinating field. It is key, for example, in the area of preparing for epilepsy surgery, where you need precise information from recordings, subdural recordings, or even recordings based on electrodes implanted stereotactically, in order to prepare the surgery correctly. And this is, of course, information which, on the one hand, contains time series data, and on the other hand, has location information and needs to be connected to atlases. So it's a unique service which is being developed, and where we are also, those who are developing it are also preparing it for use by others according to certain rules, of course, because of the nature of the data. Now,
Jan, do you want questions during the talk, or shall we hold on the
that's
questions?
entirely up to you how you want to organize. Entirely up to you. You're chairing it.
So maybe a quick question on this one.
Of course.
Is there any link to the virtual brain which has some of those capacity as well for EBRAINS?
Yeah, yes, the virtual brain is absolutely also linked to this. That is entirely correct. It doesn't show up directly here. It would actually show up on one of the previous slides. But there are many tools and it hasn't been highlighted. So if you see whole brain simulation on the middle column, lists the virtual brain, which gives you direct access. But it's different from the medical data analytics platform. Yeah.
So I also have a question, since we're on the kind of the topic. Hi, Jan.
Sure.
Thanks for giving this awesome talk, because it really clarifies sort of what's going on with EBRAINS from my point of view. Maybe could you tell me a little bit about like, obviously, in an ideal world, you would have all the data nicely organized, standardized, with provenance, with all quality, controlled and validated, and available in a very easy way with interoperable either APIs or whatever for everybody. So what is the nature of all the data that exists? So obviously, this medical data, it's only available to the public in synthetic form, which I think it's, if I understand that correctly, it's kind of a combination of simulated and scrambled in a way. But what about the rest of the data? Like in the beginning, you mentioned that you have all kinds of data that's available in open form, perhaps, or some in controlled. What is the curation of that? What is the ability to cross query across all those different data sets? Is it very curated, or just sort of people dump it there, or a mixture?
Actually, that is part of the third bullet point, which speaks to the data and knowledge services. So I thought they would be interested in these questions. So we will at least go into some depth on those. So just in a moment.
Sure. I mean, my just one point is my particular interest is understanding how we can interoperate potentially, right? We have like the Canadian Open Neuroscience Platform. We have, all kinds of other infrastructure, as you probably know. And so where are the angles where we can connect, and where is it more complicated?
Exactly. And that is also precisely why I chose this topic, because I'm talking to you at McGill. So this is indeed a motivation for discussing these points. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So when we have these different tools and services, they of course need to be connected into workflows. So as shown on this slide, if you go from the left side, you have collections of data that goes through curation that we'll describe a bit more in a moment. The metadata are then organized in a knowledge graph, and the data are stored somewhere. You can pick them up if you find them. The data are also, or one type of metadata is actually also spatial locations or semantic terms describing locations according to certain ontologies for atlases. Then finally, when you have the data, you want to analyze the data. And we have tools and workflows that you can work with, for example, through the collaboratory that I mentioned. And then take the data to another level of analysis, or combine it with your own data in these private spaces if you do not want to share your data also to the same system. So the entry point is the web portal eBrains, and now I will try to address a little bit of actually some of these questions, going in depth into the data and knowledge services, which is one of the services. Has two main parts, for share and for find. And it is built around the so-called eBrains knowledge graph, which is an unlimited graph. It can be expanded with new types of metadata, new linkages, which is critical in contrast to a more conventional classical database, which has more limitations in this regard. So in summary, the key characteristics here would be features such as, well, a lot of the data coming from HPP research, but now targeting broader research outside the research community. So we have an open door now to data, and there is a lot of other data coming into the system. It accepts heterogeneous data. So this is not a service for one specific type of data. And because of this strategy, it is quite easy for the data provider to contribute data. It has a low threshold, but as those of you who are aware of what happens on the research infrastructure, it does create challenges on the other side, because there are many data modalities, a broad collection of content. And this, of course, forces us and others to try to help recommend standardizations. Otherwise, the value of what's coming in will be much lower. So this is openly available, and it gives several opportunities for reuse of data. So the share services has service pages where we try to explain what's going on. So we summarize our offering and give a high-level explanation of the fact that you get some advantages by sharing the data. The data will be curated. There will be some standards imposed on the metadata. The data will be discoverable. You will have citation opportunities for it, and so on. It all starts with a curation request form. So anyone can use that form, fill in, doesn't take much time, and then get the response back whether we can take the data or not. We also have specific options for journal authors. So on our web pages for the share services, we have a special page also with guidelines for publishing a data set that accompanies a peer-reviewed journal publication. And we have a data curation wiki with detailed background and information of various kinds, so that all of the research initiatives can actually look at what is it that we really do. It's all transparent, it's all visible in this collaboratory about how the data are organized and so on. And also the open minds developments, that is the metadata schemas that's being developed in the project. They're also, of course, open, and they are developed actually together with INCF affiliated initiatives. So very briefly, just one step back on the publishing of data sets accompanying peer-reviewed journal publication. Let's imagine you have a researcher Earl who aims for early sharing, very early. You might have another one, let's call her Florence, who wants to make the data findable before the article has been published, but wouldn't like to show the data at that point in time. So keep the data under embargo, but show that they are there. And then let's say Sharon wants to prepare her data for sharing, but prefers not to show anything before the article is published. So we have routes for all of these, and we actually develop these routes together with Nature Scientific Data. And they apply not for that journal only, but of course for any journal. So these are very specific alternatives one can choose, and every step is explained. At which point you, for example, will get the DOI, at which point a reviewer can have access that we provide, but no one else in the process, for example. So then the search, which is here shown the graphical user interface for the search, where you can use terms or use free text or filtered information, faceted search, all coming out, of course, of what's been collected in the curation process. And all of these steps in the curation process, how it works, are documented, as I mentioned, in the system. Now that results in then you get a search results list, and you can look at the results, and that would typically be a data card. And that is the result of what has happened in the process before, with everything organized in the knowledge graph. Using the open minds metadata schema, you arrive at a certain product page with the research objects, and from there you can then have access to the content and move on with different types of analysis. So a main route for analysis is to actually use programmatic access and the Jupyter Hub in the collaboratory. That's a typical situation. It doesn't have to be like that, but that's the typical situation. So the data card shows the value of what's being captured in the curation process. So it gives a title for a data collection or data set. It gives the names of the contributors, and by clicking on them, you also see the other contributions they have made. Actually, a young researcher might want to just simply take out a publication list from the system and have all the data sets listed, put it at the end of the CV together with publications. It links to projects that contain data sets from the same author. Project is a collection of data sets, which is a very useful feature, because if you tend to produce data in the same category, focusing on the same type of questions, you might want them not to be just separate units, but create an umbrella, so they belong under a project. There is the download opportunities. There is a detailed description of the data, a data descriptor, information about how to cite the data with DOIs, and linkages to atlases and so on. I wanted to comment, we can of course discuss this further as well, but I wanted to comment a bit more on also what type of data we are taking in. We take obviously animal research data. Then we take from the human side anonymous data. This is what's going into the system. Now, be aware that anonymized data means data that no one can trace back. Not even the researcher who deposited the data could trace back some individual data sets to an individual. So for that reason, a lot of data are actually not anonymized. They might be in terminology, I think, used outside Europe, like de-identified, which is a term we don't have. But it's a good term, but it's not, de-identified doesn't mean anonymized in our system. So the terms are shown at the top there. So we are therefore preparing for also including these strongly pseudonymized data, as we call them, which are de-identified. They are very difficult to trace back. The direct identifiers to the left, you see raw data completely intact. As you go more and more to the right, it's more and more difficult to find a way back. And all the way to the right, it's impossible. The indirect identifiers is the same principle, and the re-identification is possible for all of the first 4 columns, not possible for the last 2. But it's very difficult to re-identify the de-identified data. That's why we can treat them inside our system, but it requires special attention, as you hear in a moment. We are, however, moving now to the left here, and that requires a special service for sensitive data, which we are building. We do not have it at this point in time. So the system, so to speak, for the strongly pseudonymized data, where we try or offer a solution for human data that are very much anonymized, not entirely, but to a high degree. We have a special setup that allows people who are registered with an EBRAINS account to access these if they accept a set of conditions, including that they are tracked and that their downloading is logged and that they have agreed on all the conditions. Also, the data protection officer from the lab that have produced the data will have to agree to this system and saying that these data can be shared through this mechanism. So this has been released, a soft release is in place, and we will soon launch it more broadly. But as I mentioned, to really have the full spectrum of human brain data, we are building a service for sensitive data, and it's actually been out there for a call, and the review is going on at this point in time. So we can return, of course, to more questions, but just to continue, now how does these services use INCF resources and network? And how do we, through the development of these services, interact with other brain initiatives and stakeholders through the IBI in particular? So let's take a look at that. So INCF, something concrete. Well, INCF has been is a reality, a broker between developers in the Human Brain Project, producing the metadata schemas for EBRAINS, and leading ontology and metadata experts internationally. So this is happening, and INCF has been instrumental in that part, in that respect. And it's actually, these developments in this context is actually part of the HPP work plan. Also, the INCF is currently and has for some time developed the knowledge base, and over the recent years, the HPP has funded part of that work because it is critical for our infrastructure, as it is for others, to have an encyclopedia for the terms and terminologies, and more than that, of course, which we will be using, and we also are seeing that other initiatives are using. The standards and best practices endorsement is also very critical. We have picked up, needless to say, entirely obvious standards that have come through here and been endorsed in this system, for example, BIDS. And we are contributing standards, not necessarily only from HPP, but in collaborations of many years, including HPP researchers. One which is in process now is NEO, as an example. And this is just to emphasize this tremendously important aspect of not trying to establish our isolated world, but to, as soon as possible, whenever we work with something of relevance for standards and best practices, to bring it into this environment, completely transparent, and using also as much as possible of what's already available. Then INCF has provided forums for international interactions and co-developments through working groups. And I'm impressed to see that at the moment there are more than 40 active groups, which is really impressive. And some of them are very, very active, probably a few asleep as well, but it is really a very important environment where we are, of course, many people from our projects are contributing. Then we have the training space, which is something we in the Human Brain Project and now with the EBRAINS services are actively using and have decided to use as the home for our training products. And also, of course, to use all the other valuable training materials that are deposited there by others. One example is that we will be contributing to the training week starting August 23. And I was told to mention that registration closes on July 16th for that. Then there is a meeting place for neuroscience infrastructure providers. This is actually the Council for Training, Science and Infrastructure, headed by JB. And one example for us is the Infrastructure Committee, and there are several others. So together, the INCF is a very, very important instrument for us as research infrastructure developers to connect with others, to make use of what others have done, and to make sure that what we do is available to others. Now the IBI, the International Brain Initiative. Now this is a little bit different because the IBI, for example, organizes high-level meetings. We will have one now in October, taking place in the European Parliament, where STOA, which is a so-called scientific foresight unit of the European Parliament, has allowed us to have a workshop on topics of relevance for international collaboration in neuroscience brain research. There has been one a few years ago where the different initiatives told about who they are and where they're heading. Now we will have very clear topical discussions in front of politicians in the European Parliament, which we believe is a very good strategy to deal with particular challenges. IBI also provides a forum for interactions among the brain projects, neuroscience societies, organizations, funders, and as a result of all these interactions, different things will happen. Many different things will happen. One concrete thing that came out of it, just one, no many, is that now we start an EBRAINS and EBRO first virtual masterclass series on brain atlasing and simulation services. That's an IBI product, actually. Because of this new networking opportunities, we see and others see new opportunities. Just one example, it's also inspiration. Now, IBI has a defined set of aspirational goals, and the working groups in IBI, much fewer, but these working groups are targeting these aspirational goals, and they have participation from the countries participating in IBI. And here we have also interactions, for example, with INCF. there is an IBI Data Standards and Sharing Working Group, which has a data catalog task force, which provides feedback to the INCF knowledge base, which receives funding from the HPP, and making preparation for broader use of the knowledge base for many research infrastructures and products. This is a typical example of how we are seeing the countries with a quite seamless system where these different entities are working together. And the IBI Working Group on Data Standards and Sharing also has another task force. This is, of course, just a small part of what's happening, but just examples, the Data Governance Task Force. And they have produced an opinion article on international data governance, which includes a number of challenges, with a set of recommendations for overcoming some of these challenges with intercontinental data exchange and use, which today is quite substantial workload, and also not all of it resolved. As an example, to the left is the researcher, which is dealing with journal requirements, data archives requirements, project requirements, funder policies, national laws, international treaties, and so on. And international data governance means that there has to be something done to turn it around, so that what's done internationally allows you to gradually prepare what's being done down to the local level where the research can act, which is very difficult today when it comes to, for example, exchange of data across borders. And then some concluding comments on open science, because open science is very, very relevant for the work we do and for the work other research infrastructures are doing. And then let's look at some opportunities. So open science, of course, is, as we all know, a research accelerator. This Nature Chemistry quote, I kind of like it. It's focusing on making sure that scientific knowledge of all kinds is openly shared as early as it's practical. And there's many types of things that can be shared. For us, the data, metadata, code, and so on are the most critical aspects. And we all are aware of the challenges related to timing, the conditions, the credit, which of course the research infrastructure deals with. And how can you do it without the research infrastructure? So this is really where we need all the systems to deal with this. And it's a lot happening. So the NIH are now changing again their policies, and they recently had a workshop which kind of walked through the new requirements and the changes of open science at the NIH funded level, which is quite substantial. For example, focusing on the practices for repositories. So here again, we are back again to research infrastructures and how, to which extent data value is anticipated and planned for prior for generating data, and emphasizing that this is not an add-on activity. You have to think about it from the start. So here are a couple of key terms from the Office of Science Policy, Ulrik Jorgensen, who pointed to aims to foster data stewardship, requiring data management and sharing plans, allowing for modifications over time, accompanied by supplemental information starting January 2023, and more information in her talk that they will accept costs for repository staff time where relevant for research infrastructures, accelerating the research enterprise, advancing science, making previously unavailable datasets available. How can you do it without the research infrastructure? It will be chaos. Introducing a culture change, not an add-on, and defining what successful data should look like. Actually, an interesting comment was the data reuse may be a rarity. We hope it would not be a rarity, but I appreciate the comment because I agree that reproducibility is more realistic. Really understanding data, it requires more to be able to reuse data. But that is a key point of useful research infrastructure. And the Society of Scientific Neuroscience is active. So for example, now on Monday, I believe it is, yes, they have a Beyond the Bench course, which is deeply into this, just in the middle of it. And there you actually can even hear details of our curation workflow, and we are there as many others are. And in the EU, we have open science, which covers all of the same very, very clear messages, which are all extremely relevant for research infrastructures or when research infrastructures are needed in order to implement all these aspects, including, again, the fair data and the openness. So the opportunities, to wrap up, the open science movement, including requirements from societies, funders, to implement open science now, that creates a golden opportunity for research infrastructure. I would say over the coming 5 years, there's no other way than to really invest in research infrastructures. Then, of course, this is not so easy. So we really need to work together and interact among research infrastructures. There we have the help of INCF and IBI, and we should do it also directly. The INCF and the IBI offers unique opportunities for connecting and allowing co-development to happen under many circumstances. But the impact of what we do will definitely depend on the willingness to create synergies, to cross-link, to share responsibilities. Maybe also sometimes we do want redundancy, but also to have some division of labor to make sure we arrive at the best possible spending of our resources and maybe have a total result which is better than if we do all the same everywhere. Thanks very much.
Jan, thank you so much. It was such an impressive tour of the horizon of the various organizations and capacity of the EBRAINS platform. I think it's just remarkable. And to some extent, I feel like we are, you are following some of the steps that you've just, shown, and I think it's, but also showing all those opportunities for collaborations and linkage between those platforms. I think this is really key, and also not only key but also more efficient. It's the way we are going to move forward faster, even if those are like big projects, and we know that big projects are always not as agile as like a smaller little community-based project. I have a couple of questions, but maybe if anyone has a question, I can't see any in the chat yet, but please raise your hand. Yeah, I see Brian raising your hand. Brian is co-leading with me the NeuroHub project, Jan, and yes, please go ahead.
This is a great talk. I'm very glad to have virtually meeting you and hearing this today. I have a couple questions just to understand, maybe go back to when you talked about the medical data analytics, I guess, module. And I've seen with other projects, at least here in Canada, that I've associated with, or whether it's genetics data, for example. As you can imagine, there's different regulatory conditions. We have different provincial health bodies with their health, regulations and so on. So my question is, in that context, are you looking at, particularly with the hospitals, are the applications and the analytics tools going to the data, or are you looking at any form of cleansing of the data that then goes out? Maybe if you can comment a little bit further about how that medical data analytics portion functions from that data movement and analytics movement part of it point of view.
Exactly. Now, the present system is not a system that can do all kinds of things, but it's built on the principle of moving the tools to the data where the data are. And it's built in such a way that you don't expose the data, so that also with these federated mechanisms that are now possible, those who are inside these networks of hospitals can access or combine analysis across hospitals, but they don't see the data. So it is in this regard, a service which go no further than what the tools allow you to do in that service. But as we move forwards, it is unavoidable to have a what we call the service for sensitive data, which gives much more flexibility, and where you can really have the deeper access to the data and introduce additional tools and work on collections of data that are in this category of a need for protection. So that means that there are all the questions around the permissions, the access for exactly who, and for what data and so on, and for what purposes, where they both will need their permissions from their own nations, because as we all know, no one can just do research on human data anywhere. That's not allowed. You have to have your ethics in place, and you have to follow your national regulations for what you can do with research on human data. And that's different in different countries, how it works. Then there will have to be requirements from the other side, for example, where the data have been produced, and these have to meet. So there are a few things to fix, but there are therefore two main challenges. One is this data governance challenge, which needs to be fixed, and that's fully possible with the right systems in place. And then, of course, the technical challenge of having a system that has the necessary control and security. So we're moving in that direction. And first, we need to make it work properly at the European level, but it is urgent because also to go beyond, we're seeing today problems with many data types just across the Atlantic. And this is something we are painfully aware of and would like to contribute to do something with as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. I have another question, but I'll let someone else go ahead of mine if we have time.
Samir, did you have a question?
Yeah,
or I can't see your hand.
Maybe
Yeah,
I'll just
go ahead.
I'll add to that last one. So, for example, here in Montreal at the MNI, we have released something called See Bigger, which is a combination of research and clinical data. I would say it's de-identified. Maybe it's not anonymized in the full sense, the way that that you've described in your chart. But that's a reality now. And one of the big stumbling blocks was getting the ethics to do that. That took us like realistically, it took us 3 years to get that all done and multiple iterations. But now it's there. And so within our jurisdiction, we're allowed to share this patient data. And obviously, you know, nothing is fully anonymized if you release any kind of raw data. Like you can still, you know, maybe trace from a sulcal shape who is who. But you know, basically there's no identifying information. So you'd have to really do a forensic analysis. Now, that obviously has advantages because you can do more detailed analysis. You can control your pipelines, all this kind of stuff. In the situation you were describing, it sounds like, you know, maybe there's an algorithm or a tool that is vetted and can be run, you know, on data in the background in the hospital network, and then you just get the result. Is there a movement towards trying to bridge the gap so that people can access the raw data? I mean, the value is clear, right? There's billions of dollars of research that is or data that's lost or limited, and there's a need to accelerate scientific discovery, and being able to share more data definitely does that. So, you know, is there what is the situation in Europe with, you know, being able to move in that direction? Is it a bridge too far, or is there something going on in that respect?
Yeah, there is definitely something going on. So what we showed here, the fact that we have a call and are aiming for a service for sensitive data, which actually will do exactly what you say. It doesn't mean that will solve everything, right? Obviously, because these are quite big challenges. So there is also an initiative in Europe called European Health Space, which is going to focus broadly, far beyond brain, of course, on exactly this challenge. And we're following it also very much from eBRAINS. So I can say that from a European perspective, this is really on the agenda. There's a high degree of awareness and several initiatives taken to deal with it. It's become more difficult recently because of GDPR. But on the other hand, GDPR is a clarifying system, and it didn't introduce as many new things as many would have thought, perhaps. It actually just clarified a number of things. But now comes the problem of then interpreting these clear rules and find practical solutions, which is a technology development challenge and also a data governance challenge.
I feel like GDPR probably needs a subsection for research data versus, you know, Facebook or something like that. But
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thanks a lot, and Samir, for the questions. Yeah, and I think one thing that I'm still struggling with is how do we maintain agility in those big projects? Because and you pointed out to the open science communities and things like that, but I can see how fast, for instance, the bid standards are developing, and I have a, you know, like I wonder how you incorporate those things as quickly as the actual research community can in some ways, unless you, I think that's part of your plan, unless you make that research community part of the project and make sure that's either. But so what is your kind of a thinking and view on those lines?
That is a question which actually was discussed in a meeting in our governance structures, which involves a number of people, just a few days ago, precisely this topic, because this is the reality. We are talking about scientific research. We are talking about going into the unknown. And that means that we cannot just say, oh, we got something, here's a tool. We're going to maintain that for 5 or 10 years. It could be that it's useful. And what is the success criterion for software? Well, if it's alive after 5 to 10 years, it's great. It means two things. There are good developers and it was useful. Great. But we all know that the world doesn't work in that way for everything. So there will be changing needs. There's this agility, as you say. I personally feel it's part of daily life. And if you can't live with it, you can't develop a useful research infrastructure. On the one hand, frustrating because of this need to constantly modify. And on the other hand, of course, it's the reason why we're in the business. So it's a key question and we are much aware of it and we'll see how we solve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's also like a social question to me. It's it's really getting those research groups to be part of the development in some ways, which is
and exactly, and that's why I emphasized in one of my first slides that the connection from the EBRAINS research infrastructure to the HPP science has been absolutely crucial, because you don't generate a research infrastructure in isolated environments. Who would know what others would need. It doesn't happen like that. You have to be connected all the time. And that's what we've had in our lab over the years. That's what we essentially do now in the teams we have, which go across different partners in Europe, where there's always this strong connection to where the realities are in terms of the questions and the research.
I think, Brian, you have probably the last question.
I was just going to ask you to follow on what you remarked about those teams to make that direct connection with the research space. I guess in terms of, can you speak about maybe the composition? Are those teams like sourced locally in proximity to the researchers, or do you kind of have like a global group that makes sure that the needs of the research community are taken into account as part of the development plan? How do you work that?
Yeah. The present arrangement is funded by the Human Brain Project, and there we have both. Primarily developers and teams developing tools directly in the context of the research and in the same places, actually, primarily. But we do also have a few groups that are not connected to the research groups, but they work constantly in dialogue with the others who are, let's say, in the middle of the community, if you like. So we have both instances in the project, but very, very tight connections between those who are, let's say, coming directly from the community where the users are, and those who are, let's say, technology experts that in some cases are in separate units. So we have both instances.
Thank you.
Jan, thank you so much again. I see that the time has gone very quickly, and that speaks to something. And yes, a lot of round of applause. I know that's virtual, but please hear that from us. And yes, let's keep in touch. I know we have we share some of those networks, and so we definitely will keep in touch. But maybe at some stage we'll go a bit more in details and say exactly what exact interaction we could develop. I think that'd be great for the near future.
Absolutely.
Thanks again very much, and have a good night. I know it's late for you now, so. And
not too late.
Hopefully see you in person at some stage.